This is better. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I will start respecting the people who came on time so I don't keep you waiting longer, and inshallah, people will trickle in. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Inshallah, the topic today is vulnerability in Islam. So we'll begin with just kind of me being a scientist and a psychology professional. I'm just going to do the boring definitions kind of at the beginning. And then inshallah, hopefully that will be over soon. So when we talk about vulnerability, it depends on who you're talking to. So if there's any kind of like engineering people in the room, they might think vulnerability meaning, a system, a computer or a system vulnerability that it's vulnerable to kind of hacks, right? That's not what I'm going to be talking about today, okay? So it was very difficult for me to find a definition. So even for psychologists, for scholars, when they try to define what vulnerability is, although most of us kind of have an idea of what it is, especially that it's been kind of like in the media and in vogue lately, it's difficult to come up with a sentence to define it. So I thought, okay, well, maybe then we can talk about not the definition, but rather the different kinds of vulnerability, okay? And that made my task a little bit easier. So I kind of categorized it into like these, roughly into these not very neat categories: genetic, environmental, social, and psychological. And today, depending on the time, we'll probably just be talking at the person level. So another part of this, I talk about the group level or the community level. I don't think we'll get to that today. But everybody in this room, whether we like it or not, we're going to be going through some inevitable vulnerabilities. For example, getting old. Whether we like it or not, we're all going to get old. Whether we like it or not, no matter how healthy we age, certain things are going to go away or, decrease as we get older. Our reaction time, how long it takes us to get a joke, whatever it is. But, subhanAllah, we live in California, anti-aging business, billions of dollars. And for some reason, women and now men think that anti-aging or aging healthy is being 20 forever. That's never, ever going to happen, because that is something that is just genetically, we are going to age. Certain things are going to decrease as we age. That's the way it is. Getting married, that is a vulnerability, right? When you get married, you're going to be with somebody inevitably different than you, that was raised in a different house. If this is the perfect spouse, the perfect husband, the perfect wife, you might live with them for one day and they might die the next day, right? I know someone, her husband, she was married to the best person ever. And that's according to her account, not other people's account. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remembered him, right? They can get sick. Or you can get married to somebody and all of a sudden they change. They come out of their faith, or they cheat on you, or multiple things. So many uncertainties that we can't really control, right? Parenting. Having a kid, right? That's a vulnerability. Especially when they become teenagers, it's now another opinion in the house. They go through the hormonal roller coaster. You can't predict what's going to happen next. You can't predict if that door is going to be shut in your face. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if your kid, when you give birth, are they going to be autistic? Are they going to have a learning disability? Assalamu alaikum. Or what's going to happen? All of this is completely outside your control. So I think let's begin with that, kind of like breaking down what vulnerability is. So let's begin with the first one, environmental vulnerability. All of us are sitting here in beautiful California. It's sunshine outside. Really, I can't think of a better place to be. You're in a masjid in California with people who are here to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on a Friday night. Many other people have chosen to do other things, right? But we're here. But we don't know. Any second, we can have an earthquake. They've been talking about an earthquake that will happen in the next 30 years, for the past 20 years. So inevitably something will happen. We are completely not in control of this. But subhanAllah, the normal thing in the Quran or in Islam is to give you assurance and to give you comfort. So when you look in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. He has made the earth flat for you. So you can, not just flat for you, but to be your servant. The earth is serving you, right, in terms of plants and fruits and vegetables, and for you to basically spread out and walk in all its dimensions. We all return to him. very quickly in the next verse, this is a very assuring verse, right? Like the earth is your servant. And then the very next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the next two verses, don't be so secure and comfortable in how flat this earth is, how subservient this earth is to you, because at any moment, are you so sure that we will not send storms or tsunamis or hurricanes? You're not. You don't know. General rule is, yes, be secure, but there is that thing in the back of the mind that at any minute, we don't belong here. There's nothing that is forever. Okay, the second category broadly of vulnerability is we could talk about genetic or biological vulnerability. Again, this is completely outside someone's control. You come into this world with genetics. How the cards are shoveled could be in your favor or not in your favor. You know, some are tall, some are short, some are more attractive, some are not. Such variety that you have zero control over how tall or how short you are. You come in with certain genetics. You come in with genetics for certain genetic disorders. In fact, just being genetically a male, you are predisposed to certain genetic vulnerabilities from actually before birth. So it's much harder for a pregnancy with a male to come to term than with a female. From the very beginning, the male genetic kind of like genome just has certain vulnerabilities that makes the man more at risk of dying from the very get-go. And so it's not like, you know, that women shorten their lives or anything like that. There's actually just a I'm sorry, that's what it is. Being a woman, you come into the world with certain genetic vulnerabilities as well, right? It's not a secret that the average woman is weaker physically than a man. That's just not a secret. We can talk about equality from now till tomorrow, but it is much harder for a female to go running at 3 o'clock in the morning than for a male. That's what it is, right? And all host of other kind of genetic predisposition associated with the hormonal system differences and all of that. Really, we can't do anything about that, right? These are predispositions. When I say we can't do anything about that, I don't mean that we settle, or I don't mean that there's what you do with them, you do have a choice. But there are brackets around what you could do with them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He grants, like notice in this verse, Allah says that He يَهِبُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ إِنَاثًا. He gifts. He doesn't say that it's mandatory, that when you get married, it's mandatory. The expectation is everybody should have kids. No, that's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He can give, grants, blesses with females, with males, or He can make you impotent, like just not able to have kids, period. That's another vulnerability or lack of it. It depends on how you think of it. SubhanAllah, one of my Islamic studies teacher, this lady, like all she does all day is just helps people to memorize and read Quran with tajweed much better. That's all she does from like morning till night, okay, on Skype. And this lady doesn't have children or can't have children. And then subhanAllah, you think about it, like according to our societal norms, she can't have children, you know, empathy, sympathy, oh, may Allah give you or whatever. But subhanAllah, who should be the one that's sympathizing with the other? Her with us, who are so consumed with dunya, or she who spends her entire day giving to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and teaching people to read His Quran. It depends on how you view it. And then, of course, more so than any other time in today's world, there's psychological vulnerabilities. Now, I don't like separating psychological from biological. And if you listen to my first TEDx talk, you understand that that's something I really don't like doing, because there's no separation between biology and psychology, in my opinion. It's silly that we do that in universities to make it simpler, but there is no such thing. Because there are genetic predispositions to depression. And there are genetic predisposition to obsessive compulsive personality and certain personality type. Inshallah, I'll come back. But especially with depression, certainly we know now that there is genetic predispositions. So you can tell somebody to be more religious, and that's not going to lift up the depression if it's something that's genetic. This happened at least twice. I was once at a qiyam, and mashallah, the sheikh that was giving the khatira for the qiyam learned so much from him. He gave such an amazing khatira. But then youth were allowed to do this amazing thing where they can text anonymously questions. And this youth, I'm guessing from the text, it was probably a young male, texted that he suffers from depression. And he doesn't want to tell his parents, he doesn't feel comfortable telling his parents what to do. And the Shaykh, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him, says to him that basically you have depression because you should be more religious. But you're giving this message to a young man that people his age are not at the masjid on Saturday night. You're giving it to somebody who's fasting, who's praying, who's doing qiyam. You're telling them that you're not religious enough. I don't know what happened to this boy, but I think about it. I wonder if he had suicidal ideation, and I wonder if that night was the night that he decided to take his life. Because whether we like it or not, we do have suicidal issues in this community. I gave a talk on mental health for mass up north, and I was told as I was going there that they had a string of 7 or 8 suicides in a row in the Muslim community. And then when I posted about that, somebody from a community, I'm not gonna mention which nearby masjid, said that we also lost somebody to suicide. The parents don't want to let the community know, but their kid committed suicide. So these are things we cannot really sweep under the rug, because you really can't. And in another khutbah, Jum'ah khutbah also, the Shaykh, may Allah bless him, the Khatib, said that, if we had, everybody was religious and really into Islam and stuff, that we would never need psychologists or mental health professionals, because everybody would have no problems. Alhamdulillah, if Allah has blessed you with no disorders and no psychological disorders, don't make the judgments that it's easier for other people out there. There are mothers that struggle to wake up in the morning to take their kids to school. And as they struggle out of the blanket and take their kids because they suffer from depression, and they drive them the entire way, as they're driving their kids, they're thinking, I want to tell my kids I love them. I have no energy to say it. SubhanAllah, honest to God. I have no energy to just say the words, I love you, to my kids. And then drop off the kids, and then regretting the entire way, why couldn't I just say to my kids, I love you, and feeling guilty over that and going back to that bed again? Or, males, so their depression is a little bit different than females, because sometimes it's not sadness that's obvious. It's sometimes irritability and getting angry very fast. And of course, you're irritable, so your wife doesn't want to talk to you, leaves you, gets divorced from you, people in the community don't want to be with you, but all it is just a big mask for being depressed. So this is like a really very thing that we need to really attack at the roots, and get that out there, that depression, there are people that this is a genetic predisposition, and that is their bala, that is their test in dunya. Is leaving your aqidah, not being a good Muslim, might that cause sadness and depression? Absolutely, yes, it says that in the Quran. But understand that there are many different causes, and not everybody who's depressed is because he's not or she's not a good Muslim. Depression is the second leading cause of disability in the United States, and it's going to be the first leading one, I believe, in 2050, although don't quote me on that. So it's a major thing. People take days off work. People delay marriage because of this. People get divorced because of this. Parents do horrible things to kids because of this. And then kids who had parents who were depressed are much more likely to then be depressed, are much more likely to be anxious, are much more likely to be overweight, and the list goes on. So that's another psychological vulnerability that somebody might be tested with that. Now, you can also have a vulnerable personality, right? So there's people who talk about personality types. So this is not Dr. Phil, Oprah, or any kind of the personality tests that frequent, Facebook. And this is a very well-researched, over the years, thousands of studies, very reputable research on personality A versus type personality B that has shown that one of these personality types is seriously associated with some physical risk. So people with type A personality, these are people who are very competitive, which by our society standard, that's amazing, right? If you apply to a job and you say you're very competitive, you're very achievement-oriented, that's an amazing thing. If your kid is like that, that might be really encouraged at the school. There seems to be a time urgency all the time. So it's like there is never enough hours in the day to finish what you need to finish, right? Like just that list never ends. And subhanAllah, people will be like, you know what, you can get it done, you just need a time management class. No, you don't need a time management class. You need to delete things off the list, because you're spreading yourself so much that there's holes now in how much you're spreading your soul. They're very critical of themselves because they're perfectionists. And because they're perfectionists, they also expect the same of other people. Well, if I can do X, Y, and Z, why can't she do that? Why can't he handle working 2 jobs to support his family? I can do it. So they're very critical of themselves, of other people. Here is the thing about this. Not that they're annoying to have in the community because they're overachievers, but they're also annoying to themselves and to their internal organs, because these people end up having their blood clots, and they have a much higher chance of heart attacks. And of course, if the blood clot travels to the brain, that's a stroke. And subhanAllah, in this generation, it used to be that when I used to give a lecture on strokes, that this is an aging disease, or classified as that. It's no longer such a thing. That people younger and younger are dying from heart attacks and from strokes. So if you recognize that, you don't have to put your hands up or anything, but if you kind of see yourself as this, this is, a lot of it is genetic, but you might want to recognize that, and you might want to do something about it, because it's really not good for you. Now, when you are very competitive, very irritable, very aggressive, very achievement-oriented, your heart beats faster, right? Your heart beats fast, you're always on the go. Well, the heart is a muscle. That's not a surprise, right? Your heart is a muscle. So when you work a muscle, the harder you work a muscle, what happens to it? It gets smaller or bigger? Bigger. Well, the one muscle in your body that you don't want to get bigger is your heart, because of course a larger heart means that you are more at risk of heart attacks and, very nasty things, and cardiovascular diseases. So when somebody says, really, I want to marry someone with a big heart, it's probably not a good thing unless you're going to buy some health or life insurance, because it probably means that they're going to die earlier. So that's one muscle that you do not want to exercise. So you're thinking, okay, so type A personality, they have really big hearts. Are there any other people that have even bigger hearts? And indeed, there are people who have bigger hearts. And that is people with type D personality. So these people are obviously more at risk, right? So in addition to all the stuff that we mentioned before, they have a higher level of negative emotions, but mainly towards themselves, right? So depression is, I guess, in a way, aggression turned towards yourself, right? They're worried, they're irritable, and then on top of all of this, they're shy and they're socially awkward. So imagine you have this that predisposes you to heart attacks and strokes, and on top of all of this, you're shy. So you can't ask for help because you're shy and you're very socially awkward. And then when you come into a community or a gathering, people don't want to be with you because you come across as arrogant, because they don't know that you're just shy and actually you're very vulnerable. So keep that in mind. Now, obviously, you're thinking, well, what's the other one that's the opposite of this? And there is what's called type B personality. And type B personality, if we push all the way to the extreme type B personality, these are the people that are very easygoing. So here's the thing. Alhamdulillah, their heart will be very healthy. They won't have an enlarged heart. But, they're very not motivated to do anything. So they'll sit on the couch, they'll smell something burning in the kitchen, be like, oh, it's okay, it'll be fine. Things will take care of itself. Or like they completely do not freak out no matter what's going on. Like, I'm going to get fired. It's okay. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send his rizq. It'll be fine. I'm sure like a job is going to come knocking down my door, So it's obviously not good to be that too, because it could be frustrating to be like that. So these are just a survey of some kinds of vulnerabilities. Of course, there's many, 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 many more. The question becomes, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make human beings vulnerable and weak? Why? I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have made all of us perfect. It's not beyond Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the perfection, to make his beings perfect. Is that right? He is the most competent. He is Al-Qadir. If he wants to, he could have had perfect beings inherit this earth. Why did he have to make people that are pedophiles, that do such atrocious thing? Why would he have to allow people for whatever that's happening in Syria? Why? These are really bad people. And this is a question that's seriously asked by a lot of people who leave Islam. It's asked by people who are atheists. If there is a God, if there's this loving God, why would he do that to his earth, his creation? Why? That doesn't make sense logically to our limited human minds. Where here's the thing. There's many reasons for why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us vulnerable. Number one, a vulnerability to you and I might not be a vulnerability on the overall scheme of things. What our limited minds can comprehend is so not even a fraction of. It's very, very, very small of what's going on out there in the universe. We are nothing. The Earth is not even a dot in the galaxy of things. The most that we have been in terms of research inside the Earth is a few kilometers. We don't even know what goes on behind that because we would melt from heat. We can't. Our human capacities, we can't. We have not been outside the atmosphere, a number of kilometers outside the atmosphere. We can't. No matter how advanced technology has become, we can't send satellites there. We don't know. I know we like to think this is the age of information and we know so much, but I'm sorry to say we don't. And particularly with this generation and the generation of me, and information, they think they know everything. And that's some of the reasons that some of the youth leave Islam too, is this thinking that I'm invincible because I have access to so much information that I can solve whatever problem that's out there and maybe even eventually get rid of death, right? I can explain anything and there's science to answer a lot of things. But the thing is though, when you're looking at what you know, you're not looking at what you don't know. And the ratio of what you don't know to what you know is very close to zero, okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Mulk, the dominion, تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. Blessed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is the king, the owner of everything out there, right? Including your personality types, right? And He is qadir. He is able to do whatever He wants. He is able to make all of us perfect if He wants. He's able to make adults such amazing people that we never have to worry about pedophiles when we let our kids play on the street. But He has chosen otherwise because He is also the all-knowing, al-alim. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. The entire reason, He's saying the entire reason that He has created death and life. Note that death comes before life. And there's a lot we can say about that, but maybe not now, right? The entire reason of why we're here is so He can make us vulnerable. That's the entire reason. Why does He want to make us vulnerable? So He can check which of us is the best of worshipers. And so, like, if you try to engineer a software, like let's say math tutoring software or like a comprehension software or something like that, which software out there will calculate the person's personality type, the person's genetic vulnerabilities, psychological and biological and all of it. The person's early childhood experiences. Was this person abused? Did this person have a parent that died? Did this person have both parents die? Did this person go through war? Taking all of that into account and come up with a test that's tailored for you. For you, for you, for you, for you. Just for you. That is a test that's custom made for you. I don't know of any program out there that does that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that. He will give you the test that's appropriate for you. If I were to right now say that, okay, I would like to test the mathematical abilities of everybody in this room, I'm not going to do that. I'd be the first to fail. But let's say that I said that, I want to test the mathematical abilities of everybody in the room. So I'm going to give everybody in the room a test of what's 1 + 1 to measure abilities. Would that tell me who's the best mathematician in the room? Would that tell me? Absolutely not. Because, Jannah, what's 1 + 1? What is it? I can't hear you. 2, right? She's 6 years old. She's 6 years old. So her mathematical ability is just as good as everybody in this room who will say also 2. But if I gave right now a really complicated, calculus kind of very difficult test to people in the room, that will tell me the abilities of the person in the room. Maybe. But what if somebody in the room is really anxious and has test anxiety and can't really show off their skills because of that? And the test doesn't show that. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take all of that into account in calculations that is way beyond what our simple human mind can understand. So we'll take all that into account and we'll give you the bala, we'll give you the test that is appropriate for you, right? So one of the reasons is that to show these vulnerabilities is to really show your element. What kind of worshiper are you? Right? Can you answer easy tests? Can you graduate into a little bit harder tests? Right? Can you graduate into even a bit harder tests? How are you going to do with these tests? Okay. Now, you know, this ayah, from Surah Al-Baqarah, right? You probably say this ayah as a part of your morning dhikr or your masa dhikr or whenever, right? I'm sure you've come across of it many times in Surah Al-Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. Right? I am sure you've read this many, many times, right? Or maybe you will be reading it many, many times. Well, what that part in red is saying, it's a series of du'as. And that particular part that's shaded in red is saying, "Oh Lord, burden us not with that which we have no ability to bear." So notice that none of the du'as in this ayah is saying, "Oh Allah, never stress us out. Oh Allah, never give us any vulnerabilities. Oh Allah, never give us any pressure." Right? It's actually saying, Allah, burden us. You're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to burden you, but only with what you can tolerate. Like, why couldn't it be that you just make dua that you never have stress or anything bad happen to you? Like, you can make that dua. Why not? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us how to make dua and is teaching us that the best of dua is to ask for stress that we can handle? Right? Like, I asked myself this. And then one time, I was preparing for a lecture for my psychology of stress class. And I came across the study. And I read that paragraph, let's just say many times. And I probably didn't finish preparing for that lecture that time. I'm not sure what happened. But I just kept thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. Because the study showed that, this is a study in a psychology of stress book. It's saying that what they did is they brought these rats, because they can't really do this to human, and they would stress them out, right? And they would see what would happen to them. But what they noticed was that when they got this group of animals and they stressed them out, so that they can tolerate the stress. So they stress them out to a tolerable level, that these rats that were stressed even repeatedly stressed to a tolerable level, that they became tougher, that they handled future stress better, but not only like from a psychological point of view, but also from a biological point of view. So when they looked at their nervous system, when a stressor happened, usually a stress response happened, you release stress hormones like cortisol, which makes you fat around the midline. You know, all of these other chemicals we're not going to go into, and hormones that can affect you in the short run. It enables you to act fast and it's good for you. But it's not good if it's on all the time, right? Then it causes havoc. So what happens is that when these rats were stressed to a level that they can tolerate, right? Oh Allah, don't burden us with which we can't handle, is that their stress response was very not freaking out. So in the future, when a stressor happened, the nervous system said, "Oh, don't worry about it. You did fine in the past. I don't need to make energy to do all this energy to make the stress hormone and the stress chemical. That's not needed. You did fine in the past. I'm only going to release a little bit, and that's it." That's amazing. Because why? These stress chemicals, some of them, when you release them, what happens is when they're released in the blood, it makes your blood thick, literally. Not only thick, but it makes it like honey, so it's like Velcro. So what happens when your blood is like Velcro and sticky is that you eat a fattening diet, because of course when you're stressed out, you want to soothe yourself by eating, you know, fattening things and high calorie things. We all do that, right? And what happens is this fattening things will stick to the Velcro. What happens then is that your vessels will get narrower and narrower and narrower because you have fat things and calorie things sticking to this very sticky blood, and then you created a clot. And if that is going to the brain, you got a stroke. If that goes to the heart, you got a heart attack, right? So in essence, the conclusion of this is that when you have repeated stress that you can handle, that is tolerable, that you are actually better off. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not instructed us to sit there and pray for, never give me stress, never give me bala, never test me. Because He could have said that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us what to pray for that is actually inevitably better for our system, even if we don't understand it yet. So in essence, vulnerability, your stress, whatever it is, as long as you handle it with strength, and you demonstrate to yourself that you're able to handle it, meaning that it's tolerable, you actually end up with resilience. So you're able to jump back where you were in life, stronger or at the same place, so you're not always catching up. And your biology or your nervous system does not cause havoc in your body. All right. Some of you might be familiar with like the vulnerability researcher, Brené Brown. How many people here are familiar with her? Okay, one person. So anyhow, she's like the vulnerability researcher, right? So what she what she found in her research, that people who embrace vulnerability, who are okay with, now it's not like you're sitting there and you're saying, Ya Allah, give me just so many vulnerabilities. I just want that, I just know I'm a good student. Go ahead, bring it on. Any ibtila, I will just, because in essence what you're saying when you're like, you know what, and subhanAllah, sometimes some worshippers get this arrogant. And we got to remember, remind ourselves that the arrogance of a worshiper who's been praying all night is worse than somebody who's been sinning all night and who's been repenting. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the malaika can hear his or her tears. So let's not ever think that we got to this level where we're just this amazing worshiper that's making qiyam all day and have this arrogance. So we're not necessarily asking for vulnerabilities, but we're asking that when they come, we can handle them, okay? So that she found that when people did embrace vulnerability, that it made them feel beautiful, and it was the place of creativity and joy in their life, that people were then able to become creative, right? And then when you think about vulnerability, and particularly in today's world, vulnerability is something that allows you to connect to other people, right? If you're completely self-sufficient, why on earth would you need people? People are annoying. Let's just face it. They ask for things. They ask you to give them a ride. They ask you to babysit their kids. They ask you to tutor their kid. Whatever it is, right? Why on earth? There has to be a cost-benefit analysis, right? These vulnerabilities, when they happen, they make us comfortable to connect. And alhamdulillah, you know, there's people in the community who are very comfortable and self-sufficient to be on their own, and then they are like, when you ask them, would you like, no, thank you, I don't need any help, because they're worried that you would reciprocate and ask, well, I need help or something. Or people who are just really 100% of their time on Facebook, their posts is all just of invulnerabilities, of how, mashallah, you know, their kids do qiyam every night, how, mashallah, their kids just, or some people will even post the report card of straight A's online. So when you have things like invulnerability, wallahi, I had this female once tell me that she had, may Allah give her strength, she had a very difficult marriage. And she would tell me that she would go through the pictures on Facebook and she would cry and she would hate going through them because her marriage was so difficult. So anyhow, so, you know, the person that's posting, you know, the picture of straight A's, imagine what it would be instead of like a like or congrats, what it would be if that mother said, you know, my son has been suffering with a learning disability for years, or my son had ADHD, and subhanAllah, we've been through tutoring, I gave up X, Y, and Z, and here we are today. Imagine that story. Then you're not commenting with like and congrats, and maybe to yourself you're saying some bad things, but you're rather having now a story of connection. Oh yeah, how did you do that? I know how that feels. My son has a problem too. My daughter has a problem too. Where did you go for tutoring? How did you do this? It's causing a crack in my marriage. How did you deal with that when you had all of these? And then it's a connection. Then it's a conversation. Maybe you'll pick up the phone. Maybe you'll meet that person for coffee. But it's a much more connection when you display a vulnerability. I'm not saying go around and complain. But we got to know the difference between complaining and venting. It's a big difference between them. Or benefiting someone from your experience so they don't have to go through the same thing, or feel that it's normal to be invulnerable, right? So it's a funny story. So, you know, sometimes, you know, subhanAllah, females would post something like, my husband just surprised me with a trip to Hawaii. But I really would love that these pictures, just like every picture is coded with the GPS information, the location it was taken, the time and date it was taken, right? I really wish that these pictures come like coded with what happened before the picture. Like like everything before the picture. Because sometimes you know, the story is my husband cheated on me 2 times. This was our way to make up, was the trip to Hawaii. You know, obviously that's not posted before. But honestly though, let's be honest ourselves. How many retakes and fights to take a family picture before you had that family picture, perfect picture where everybody's smiling. We all know it took so many retakes. And you never, post the picture of a burnt cake that you tried 10 times before you finally decided to use the box and have a perfect looking cake. Things like that happen. But it's okay, everyone. Now, and of course, there's satr in Islam, and you shouldn't just go and, say all the bad things. But it's okay to connect every now and then on a human level. That's very okay. Okay. Bernice said something really interesting that I really liked. She looks at what is the root of the word courage. And nowadays, to have courage, you have to do something heroic. Like you have to be this extraordinary person to be described as a courageous person. But if you actually look at the etymology, the root of the word courage, where it comes from, it actually means cœur. And cœur means in French, heart. And in Spanish, the word for heart is corazón, I think. Yes? Am I saying it wrong? Just, you don't have to say that right now. Okay, yes, so something to that extent. So anyhow, the word courage actually comes from the word heart. And what it used to mean, the word courage, is to basically wear your heart on your sleeve, to be a genuine, authentic person who's not worried to really show their true self, that the courage is to show your true self, not to put on a mask of perfection. So subhanAllah, that's what initially what the word actually meant. That's what really the utmost courage is, for you to be authentic to yourself in private and in public. And as the distance gets shorter, because we all have multiple selves, right? We have the ideal self that we inherited from what the sheikh wants us to do, from what mom and dad wants us to do, which is probably, I don't know, get married by 25, have 3 kids by 30, some sort of kind of module out there, have a house by, I don't know when. And so like a perfectionist kind of self. And then there's the public self of how you are in public, and there's really how you see yourself. So as the distance between these 3 types of self gets shorter, it's never going to be identical. Like, let's not be, it's not a perfect world. That is a sign of a psychologically fit or healthy person. And as your public self departs so much from your private self, that creates a lot of shame, where you lose respect for yourself. And that is the beginning of all danger, particularly for youth or people who question their aqidah, is they really start to feel shame about who they are. And then this gets generalized to, well, a part of me is Islam, then I'm shameful of Islam. How do I get rid of that part? That's the part that I've seen very dangerous in people who leave Islam. And then if you have a distance between your actual self, who you really are in private, and your ideal self of what society expects you to be, of course that creates an anxiety, because you're not filling in that gap, and in your head you're always changing society, if you will. Okay, so we all have to have the courage to be imperfect, because there's only one perfection, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nobody should be striving towards perfection, because it's not possible. Like, you're setting yourself up for failure. Not only are you setting up yourself for failure, but you're saying that, oh Allah, one of your attributes, Al-Qadir, which is perfection, the most able, I don't believe in, because that's one thing I want to strive for. And we will never be even a fraction of that attribute. So let's realize our place in this dunya, that we're not nowhere near that. So let's have the courage to be an imperfect parent. Like, subhanAllah, when you look up parenting books, if you are a parent, I think I did that once, and it was like 123,000 or something like that on Amazon. I am 100% sure that according to some of these books, maybe all of them, that my kids are going to need some serious therapy when they're adults, right? You're going to be wrong according to any of these books. It's very, very anxiety-provoking, right? And that's why I really dislike any kind of self-help book that is a recipe book. If your teenager says this, you answer with this. Never do this when this. That just does not work, right? Because people have bad days. Parents have bad days. In fact, one time I was asked in a lecture, I think it was, what was more important, parenting or marriage? So when you're married and you become a parent, what should be more of a priority? And one asked me, this lady asked, when we're fighting, right? Because married people fight. Like, even in a perfect marriage, people fight, and people get mad at each other, and people, do all kind of things. And, the general advice is, whether it's by your parent or a self-help book, is never, ever display fighting in front of your kids. Never do that. Like, that's just the biggest sin ever to commit. But personally, now of course some people might disagree with me, but I think a civilized way to fight in front of kids is ideal because it shows them that here is how we argue. I'm not always going to agree with dad. He's not always going to agree with me, but there is mutual respect. And that we get mad and we make up, and we do that a lot. So the person or the child feels secure that, oh, they get, everything will be fine. It's not that once, everything is perfect. This parent was telling me that when she was young, she thought that people never fought because her parents would always hide it in the bedroom. And she just never knew that people fought. And in her marriage, she really struggled with the first fight because how could that happen? I must have a terrible marriage. My parents never fought. Right? But I'm not obviously name calling and things like that is never appropriate in private or in front of the kids. But a mutual respect where people argue and get mad at each other, and a regular assurance to the kids that I love your dad and he loves me regardless of what fight is going on. That's completely okay. It's actually real, and it will get the kids used to things like that happen. It's okay to be an imperfect spouse, right? When people first get married, their biggest thing is that, maybe especially for females, that if he's quiet and he's not saying anything, he doesn't love me anymore. It's only been 1 month and we have nothing to say each other. We used to talk on the phone till 6 o'clock in the morning. What's happening here, But sometimes, being comfortable with silence, giving that person that space can just strengthen the relationship and not take away from the relationship. So giving your spouse also space to freak out every now and then for the females and for the male, and expecting that they are not perfect. Now, that is within reason, of course. I'm not saying they do kaba'ir and you say, it's okay, we're not perfect. But, within reason that you did marry a human being and you're not perfect yourself, and the marriage itself is not perfect. So take that into account. Have the courage to be an imperfect worshiper. So people sin, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He created us, He knows that we sin, right? We should always be in a state of repentance. We should always be in a state of preventing badness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to prevent khatawat al-shaitan. Shaitan is never going to come to you and say, do this horrible thing. Sometimes he asks you to do this amazing thing, but it's to prevent you from an even more amazing thing. So, whatever that goes on. But there is always the chance of repentance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I wish if we treat our kids the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala treats us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept a worshiper who's an F student. He will not reject him or her because she's an F worshiper. Because if that F worshiper becomes a D worshiper, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, welcome. Welcome to my rahmah. Welcome to my mercy. Because I love you. Because you have advanced from F to D. Or from D to C. And when they go from an A to B or from a B to C, Allah will say that, you know what? My rahmah, istighfar, my maghfirah is wide open. You say the word and inshallah I will grant it to you. But we don't do that with our friends. We don't do that with our spouses. We don't do that with our kids. But that, if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us this rahmah and maghfirah, we got to do it with His people, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ أَن يُخَفِّفَ عَنْكُمْ وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا. Allah says, this ayah, we should just sit and contemplate upon it for days. Allah says in this ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to lighten the world affairs for you because He knows this dunya can be tough. So you would think that Allah wanted to lighten this dunya, so He made things easy for us. He made us strong so we can handle things. That would be the logical thing. This dunya is difficult, I made you resilient, I made you strong, I made you powerful. But that's not what the ayah says. The ayah says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to lighten up this world and difficulties for you, so He made you weak. That's not really according to any logical thing that our human mind can think of, right? Now, number one, I disagree with the word da'if being weak in Quran. That's not the right translation, weak. Maybe vulnerable is a better translation. And also the word da'if in Arabic comes from a different root. So for example, when you say, yuda'af something, it means that you make it more. And the reason why you make it more is because in comparison to what it used to be, it's more. So anyways, like when you look at the root of the word, certainly the translation is not weak. That's really the wrong. And also, vulnerability never means weakness. They're not synonymous. So I don't want you at any point to think that vulnerability equals weakness. or anything like that. They're actually not equal. Even when you look at the dictionary, they actually mean pretty much the opposite thing. One is not being able to handle, vulnerabilities, and one that you are. So they're actually, I want to say antonyms, not even synonyms, right? But think about that. Yes. Maghrib time. Okay, so why don't we take a break from Maghrib, inshallah, and then we will finish. I really hope I get to the part of narcissism, because there's a lot I want to vent about there. So inshallah, we'll see you after Maghrib.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد
استووا واستقيموا واعتدلوا. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. ولقد آتينا موسى الكتاب فلا تكن في مرية من لقائه وجعلناه هدى لبني إسرائيل وجعلنا منهم أئمة يهدون بأمرنا لما صبروا وكانوا بآياتنا يوقنون. إن ربك هو يفصل بينهم يوم القيامة فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون. أولم يهد لهم كم أهلكنا من قبلهم من القرون يمشون في مساكنهم إن في ذلك لآيات أفلا يسمعون. أولم يروا أنا نسوق الماء إلى الأرض الجرز فنخرج به زرعا تأكل منه أنعامهم وأنفسهم أفلا يبصرون. ويقولون متى هذا الفتح إن كنتم صادقين قل يوم الفتح لا ينفع الذين كفروا إيمانهم ولا هم ينظرون. فأعرض عنهم وانتظر إنهم منتظرون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. إن للمتقين مفازا حدائق وأعنابا وكواعب أترابا وكأسا دهاقا لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا كذابا جزاء من ربك عطاء حسابا. رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما الرحمن لا يملكون منه خطابا يوم يقوم الروح والملائكة صفا لا يتكلمون إلا من أذن له الرحمن وقال صوابا ذلك اليوم الحق فمن شاء اتخذ إلى ربه مآبا إنا أنذرناكم عذابا قريبا يوم ينظر المرء ما قدمت يداه ويقول الكافر يا ليتني كنت ترابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. We'll be restarting inshallah just in 1 minute. So please, brothers on that side, on the right side, sisters on the left side. And in 1 minute inshallah we'll resume the lecture. Jazakumullah kulli khair for your patience.
So am I waiting 1 minute? Okay. Okay, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, nobody ran away. That's good. Or at least I don't know, I haven't noticed. So we finished the first part of the talk with this ayah, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said in this ayah. So it's a little bit noisy. So I don't know where the noise is coming from. Upstairs? They're just going to blame you guys. You good? Thank you. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to lighten this dunya and the difficulties. The logical continuation of the ayah should have been that, so He has made human beings strong and powerful. But instead, the rest of the ayah says, so He has created the human being weak. And then we ended by saying that weak is so the wrong translation for this ayah. Because the word da'if in Arabic comes from kind of a different root, and we went over that. But this is something beyond what we kind of comprehend, and we talked a little bit about why actually vulnerability is good. It enables us to connect, because no one ever, no matter how rich you are, how smart you are, can be 100% self-sufficient. Everyone is vulnerable. No matter how green it is, how sunny it is, always in their backyard, everybody has some sort of vulnerability. Maybe it hasn't happened yet, but I assure you that it will happen. And that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made human beings vulnerable, well, has Allah given us a system to complement this system of vulnerability? And indeed, He did. So as we discovered, maybe over the last 10 years or so, that the human brain comes with a module for compassion, right? And this ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes called mirror neurons. And it's these mirror neurons that allow you to really basically put yourself in that other person's shoes. So you know how sometimes you're sitting in the car and someone is driving and you're sitting in the passenger seat and they come too close to a car, so you're driving with them, you put your legs on the brake. That is your mirror neurons. But it's not just there to be annoying in the passenger seat, but rather to allow you to empathize, to show sympathy and compassion. And it's very difficult to show sympathy, empathy, and compassion if you have not been through vulnerability if that person is not asking for help. So alhamdulillah, we do have these complementary system, a system of vulnerability that dovetails hand in hand with the system of your compatibility, your compassion, and sympathy. So with all of this, I'm thinking, okay, so Allah has created us vulnerable. It's not a secret that all of us are vulnerable at one time or multiple times in their life. Then let me go in the Quran and search for the word vulnerability and come up with all the verses so I can make sense of this story. So alhamdulillah, I typed that in and came out with 0. As in there's 0 verses that have been translated to any kind of word vulnerability in that verse. I'm like, it's okay. You know, the sunnah, the hadith came to complete, go along the Quran, explain what wasn't there. So maybe in the hadith I will certainly find something about vulnerability. So I did an equivalent research or search in the hadith, and 0 hadith came out in the hadith. That tells us that there is a serious translation problem when we're reading the verses, because obviously vulnerability is inherent in so many of what we do. Last time I gave the talk, Brother Hassan Alwan honored me with his presence, and we were thinking about, okay, what could the translation be in Arabic? So here's a couple. They're probably wrong, but you know, let's see what that tells us. So let's begin with al-bala, and then we'll talk about fitna. So al-bala, if I ask you to come up with a definition of what is bala, what is a good definition of bala? To plague someone. What is al-bala? Anybody knows what al-bala is? Is what? Musiba. So something bad. Something bad. Shar. Something horrible. Yes? Anything else? A test, right? Right? So, yeah, you know, you're right. You know, in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, of course, we will be testing you with, you know, al-khawf, fear, and with hunger, and, you know, poverty, and all of this. How else would we test your iman? So certainly one of the meanings of al-bala is that you are tested with bad things, right? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you can have bala that's khair, that's actually good for you. So in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He will be giving you bala, bishar, right? Badness, evil, and al-khair, which is goodness. So your blessings can also be bala, can also be a musiba. Depends on how you deal with it, right? And then, you know, again and again in the Quran, it says bala and hasanan. So there is actually bala that's good and bala that's bad. So that's not the good or the bad. What you do with it is the good and the bad. So if you are given bala that's shar, that is evil, that's bad, that's a musiba, if you have patience, then you've done good. If you have bala that is tayyib, that's khair, that is good, that's a blessing, and you have not thanked, you have not shown gratitude, and instead you've shown entitlement, then that's bad, right? So it's what you do when you're given a blessing or a musiba or an evil thing. What you do with that is really defines what the outcome of that bala is, right? So that's one potential, although it's not all encompassing of what vulnerability is. The other candidate I stumbled upon is maybe fitna, right? Fitna is mentioned in the Quran several times. Of course, none of them are translated as vulnerability. And Allah says, are people going to think that they're going to come into this world and say, Ya Allah, we're worshippers, amanna, and they were just never going to face any kind of fitna or test? Like, come on, right? Fitna, actually, this is interesting. Fitna in Arabic, what does fitna in Arabic mean? So fitna comes from the word that means when you have gold, and the gold has been mixed with impurities, and what you do is, the fitna is that you get that gold and you expose it to heat to take out the impurities, right? That's what the word fitna in Arabic comes with, right? That is your test. So in essence, fitna, you do that to the gold, is to expose the element, the purity of the element gold. That's exactly what fitna does to human beings too, right? Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we mentioned earlier, if He wanted to have angels inhabit this earth, He could have. He's the all-competent, right? But He didn't. And in fact, the malaika, the angels, got mad about that. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the malaika, the angels, I'm going to have a khalifa, I'm going to have beings that inhabit this earth, right? Then the malaika said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why? أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء? Are you going to allow people to live there that will be violent and will spread all this blood and all this anger and all of this? Why? And all we do is say subhanallah wa bihamdi. All we do is worship you. Like, what more perfection do you want? And Allah says, you don't know what I know, right? But let's realize that the angels were mad at that. That they were saying we are perfect beings, and indeed they are. They don't commit sins. Why not have us inhabit this earth? So subhanAllah, humans with our vulnerabilities, with our sins, with our imperfections, we are the perfect beings for this world. Think about it this way. Let's say gold, right? Can you wear gold in its absolute pure state? Like absolutely with no impurities in it? You can't. You can't even hold it. For it to be manufactured as jewelry or worn as jewelry or into anything, it has to be mixed with impurities. It has to be mixed with invulnerabilities, right? And depending on how much impurities you're mixing in, it becomes, I don't know, there's 10, 14, how does it go, 24, 28, something like that. But then it advances in grade from, very full of impurities to very little impurities. And of course, the price of the gold goes up as the amount of impurities goes down. And then when you want to purify it back again to its essence, its element, you expose it to the utmost heat to get its pure element again. So subhanAllah, the use of the word fitna in the Quran is not random, is not haphazard, right? If you think about making that parallel with gold, is sometimes the fitna is exactly that, is a type of heat that the worshipper is exposed to really reveal their true, pure element, right? So at that moment, it might be very painful, but think of it as cleansing the impurities to show this element. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives bala, gives fitna to the worshippers whom He loves. Sometimes it's a punishment and sometimes it's people whom He loves. We are not to judge, right? We are not to say, well, this is my cousin, they're a good person, they're getting fitna and bala because they're amazing people, but this other person that I really hate, they're getting fitna or bala because I hate them and because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they're sinners, they should become more religious. We're not to judge that. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, are they getting the fitna or bala to make them pure and to really reveal, bring them back and reveal their true element, or is it a bala for them to punish them? Really, that's not up to us to kind of think about. So since there was no vulnerability translation or properly translated words of vulnerability in Quran, let's look at kind of like stories in the Quran, right? I chose some of them that you probably are very familiar with. Most of us read Surah Al-Kahf, the cave, every Friday. And the cave, the youth, they had a vulnerability in their faith, and as a result of that, they ran away to the cave, right? That was a vulnerability. They were worried that they're going to have fitna in their deen, so they ran away. They left. So this is what an example, because here is what youth does when they're being terrorized or they fear for their faith. They don't terrorize back the nation, but what they do is they actually leave if they think they can't really rescue their deen. Like the complete opposite of what potentially might happen. And then there is in the same surah, there is the story of it's usually referred to as the two gardens. I refer to it to the invulnerable man, or the man who wishes to be invulnerable. So this kind of people who wish to be invulnerable, or i.e. what people who are called narcissists, there's a relationship between invulnerability and narcissism. And I would probably think of this as somewhat indirectly synonyms for each other. And there's no secret, right? A lot of people have talked about this. A lot of researchers have written books about this, about the millennial generation, the me generation, or the I generation. But this is the first generation that when we give them surveys, that they score low on empathy and high on narcissism. So high on loving themselves, low on connecting and loving other people. Very, very dangerous. A computer analysis looked at 3 decades of popular songs, right? And what they found was, through this analysis, is the type of songs, the trend in the songs nowadays compared to over the 30 years, that there's an increase in narcissistic language in the songs. The use of I instead of we and things like that. So, if you're a parent and you used to listen to music and your teenager is like, well, dad, mom, you used to listen to music, you can just say, sorry, the music now is just much worse than before, and you're not lying. That's what the research says. A lot of words that's related to anger and antisocial behavior, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't always like that. And well, I've talked about this in other kind of lectures. I won't go over it too or belabor the point. But we know that music affects our behavior indirectly. It's in our subconscious, and it will affect your behavior. It'll affect what kind of things you buy, and that's why marketing takes advantage of that. It really affects how you are as a teenager. We can do a whole lecture on just the effect of music on you, whether you know it or not, and a lot of it you don't. So that's really serious. Everybody wanting this kind of celebrity status, reality show, right? The shows of fake people or fake lives. This really does affect our teens and now grown-ups that watch that stuff. It really does affect them. Because then everybody thinks they're really, really important. And if I'm really, really important and I'm this amazing, powerful person and this desire to be invulnerable. And, you know, when you first come across somebody who's narcissistic, it's not likable, right? And you think this person has such a strong personality, is overconfident that they're narcissists. But really, narcissism is, you could also define it as fear of vulnerability or fear of ever finding out I'm vulnerable at anything because my self-worthiness, me as a person, and how I'm evaluated depends on how powerful I am. And the more I can come across as invulnerable, the more I can be seen as a person worthy of respect. So it's actually a desperate need to connect. And it's actually the opposite of that, where that person really suffers in terms of their self-esteem. And with the first, so there's some vulnerabilities they might be able to hide or conceal, but they will, if they get hit with a vulnerability that they can't do that, they really panic and very bad things happen. Okay, so the story of the invulnerable man then in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the story, this parable of two men, and one of them had these two gardens that were amazing. It just had all of these palm trees and rivers, and the guy got so comfortable with how powerful he is that he's like, this is just, will never ever stop giving me fruits and vegetation and be just very pleasing to people who walk in this garden. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتُهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. He has entered his Jannah saying that he's invulnerable. And he described that when a person thinks that they're invulnerable, he described this as a type of self-oppression. ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. That he has oppressed himself by thinking he is invulnerable. That's serious. Because the worst kind of dhulm that you can do is self-oppression. That's so, and then as a result of this invulnerability, you know, we read this story and we don't think anything of it, but as a result of thinking that I am superior, I'm invulnerable, then he started to question, well, there is no God, there's no judgment day, and if judgment day comes, I'm this powerful man, and I have all of these followers, you know, and that's actually, there's the verse in it says that I have so many men followers in the verse, right? And I was saying earlier that subhanAllah, in this generation, you have these youth that think that they're invulnerable because they think they know so much, being in the decade of information. And as a result of that, they think that they're invulnerable. And as a result of that, they begin to think or rethink their aqidah, thinking, I am this amazing person. I can find answers on my own. Science has answered a tremendous amount of things that I have questions about, and answered it satisfactory. And science is not asking me to fast. Science is not asking me to pray. Why can't I have my cake and eat it too? And of course, as a person who's a narcissist, who's invulnerable or thinks that they're invulnerable, they never look at the bottom of that ratio. They never look, well, how much don't I know, right? And if they do consider that, but this idea of being invincible, or the video games, right? Video games just become better and better and better to the extent that you can actually be inside the video games. In fact, that you can just think with your head and move something on the screen. And this is not science fiction. That actually has happened, where people would think something and they would move, you know, the character on the screen and creating this third-person experience. And who dies in the game? The loser dies in the game. The winner never dies in the game. So whether we like it or not, on a subconscious level, that gets in there. And it makes our teens, adults, whoever, think that we are invincible, that we are immortal, that we can live forever, all of this anti-aging stuff. And it really affects slowly and slowly and slowly. You see these people not become humble to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then eventually they leave Islam, right? Humbleness, being able to be vulnerable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, look at sujood, right? All your organs, everything about you is on the floor, on the ground, right? Bowing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. if you're not okay with that, if you're not okay to be vulnerable like that, if you're not okay to belittle your your narcissist system like that, eventually you just find yourself away more and more and more, and you see people leaving Islam. Okay, so we'll skip that part. And then I'm sure you might remember the end of this story. Then the other man who doesn't have these two amazing gardens says to him, well, you know what? Had you gone into your garden and said, Masha Allah la quwwata illa billah. I'm not saying that you say, oh God, take it away from me, but I'm saying that, oh Allah, this is all from your power. You have granted it to me. Just to give that back, that thank you back. This is a blessing, that's a vulnerability for this man. Right? And we have to think, I have to think, how many blessings have I forgotten or been entitled to and not shown gratitude that is going to get me in trouble? Then that becomes my bala instead of actually a blessing that I have shown gratitude. All he had to do is just that, right? And, I have nothing. And then what ended up happening is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took his gardens, not just the vegetation and the fruits, but also made it slippery, so even people cannot go walk to enjoy the scenery. Like, took everything possible that's fruitful about this garden. So inshallah that happens to none of us. And inshallah that we do meet our blessings with gratitude, and we meet our trials with sabr and patience. So if we kind of organize all of this into kind of two dimensions, and when I think about this a lot, then you can kind of summarize a lot of things in terms of just like some vertical line and some horizontal line, okay? And all of us fit somewhere there. And it's never a point that you're there forever. You can move. You don't have to stay there, right? If you look at the vertical line as you believe in God and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? As you go up, your belief in God increases. As you go down, your belief in God decreases. On all of us, Iman goes up and down. No one is in pristine, pure state of Iman 100% every day, every minute of the day. It goes up and down. And then across, horizontally to the right, you have life events or things, blessings. So it's always like shiny or sunshine in your backyard. You have a good job. You're successful. Allah has blessed you with the children. You found a good spouse. Whatever health, whatever you find as kind of a blissful events. And then as you move to the left, you have your vulnerabilities. So maybe poverty, losses, losing a mom or a dad or a child, or having a child with a serious illness, or whatever that vulnerability may be. So there is no place that's like a perfect place. But if we look at the upper right quadrant, so if you are, everything that's happening to you, there's a lot, Allah has granted you so many gifts. And at the same time, you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're in good standing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in your iman, that goes up and down a little bit. Then you are in sakina, you have inner peace, that you have shown gratitude, you have contributed back to this earth and to the community as a way of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a really good place to be, right? But that's not where most people are at. So if you look to the upper left quadrant, where you have been tested, right? Maybe you gave birth to a child who died. Maybe you've been trying to get pregnant and finally you get pregnant and you have a miscarriage. Maybe that you lost your job. Maybe that you used to make a 5-figure salary and now you lost your job and you're becoming homeless, right? Whatever it is. Now, if your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good, then that brings you to your knees, not out of being weakness, but to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a stressful place to be. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's a place for you to say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know how much I can handle. And you've given me this. Grant me the strength. You've taken away. Grant me the strength to be able to deal with this so I can showcase to you, so I can show you how much I'm in love with you. Right? So how you deal with that, and also that will give you inner peace. Like, subhanAllah, some people in the community, you see them, and they just look happy all the time. There's nur coming out of their face. And when you get to know them, or maybe as a part of my profession, you get to know them a little bit, you have no idea about the struggles they have in their marriage, their children, themselves. And subhanAllah, as a result of how they're able to tackle that and to be in that upper left quadrant, that they still have sakina, regardless of what kind of stressors lives bring them. Then if we look on the bottom right, Allah has given you a lot of good things, has blessed you with a lot of things, but your iman is in question, right? And you start to be this narcissist person who believes that, you know what, I deserve this. I am this awesome person, I'm invincible, and I deserve this. Why wouldn't I have these blessings? I'm entitled to them. And eventually you kind of let go or answer your questions on your own, and you say, you know what, I don't really need God to answer these questions for me. I'm not going to have the restrictions of religion to tell me what to do if I'm telling millions of people what to do. And then you eventually kind of let go of that, and you struggle. And we have seen many people who were at the height of their careers and they end up committing suicide. And you're like, what? Him? He committed suicide? What else did he want? Right? The actor, the funny guy, the comedian. What is it? Robin Williams, right? He committed suicide, right? So you could be at the height. In fact, there is research that says that sometimes when you get to the top, you reach your goal, that most people actually get depression after that. Because if you got to the peak, there's nothing higher than the peak. Whatever that's going to come next ought to be lower than the peak. Think about it. If you got to the max, there's nothing more than the max. So the next point ought to be lower than the max. And if you don't have believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rida, and content with what He's given you or what He's taken away, then it becomes very difficult. A lot of athletes go through that. They'll climb the highest mountain, and after that, it can't be better. The author that wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, like that book sold millions. And she said, I went through a very serious depression after, because I knew if I were to write another book, it's not going to be as good. And she finally got the courage to write the second book, and it failed. And she was okay with it, because she had to come, well, this was the most, I can't get more than that. But when you talk about a spiritual mountain that you climb, there is no peak. You climb up, and there is more. You're a good Muslim. Maybe now you're a better mu'min. Maybe now you're a muhsin. Then there is no perfection. Then you can keep climbing to a peak and another peak and another peak, and it's just more rewarding, right? So we have to really be careful with that. Like when we set goals, we really need to understand, what is that goal about? Is that really the end? And how is this going to help us? Once we reach this goal, how is this going to strengthen our iman? How will it compromise our iman? This is something we really need to think about. Now, the lower quadrant on the left, or my left, you have bad things happen to you. So maybe poverty, losing a parent, all of the vulnerabilities that can happen, infinite amount of things. And at the same time, you are not in the best relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your iman is at best shaky. Well, then it's the question of why me? Why is it me? But that person is so much worse than me. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would Allah, that's just unfair. But listen to what you're saying. You're saying to Allah, you're not being fair. You're not being just in how you distribute your blessings or taking them away from people. You're telling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, astaghfirullah, to do His job. And who are we to even think about something like that, right? And then these people will then end up maybe in depression. They won't have the strength to live, and they end up killing themselves, because then it becomes, they have nothing to hold on to. All the material things have been taken away from them. But Allah has given you a solution. When the material things have been taken away from you, He's giving you something that's immaterial to hold on to. And when you don't have that, then you have nothing. Do you see what I mean? Right? So why don't we end here, so I can allow about 10 minutes or so for questions. May Allah bless you for paying attention to me for that long. And whatever that I said that was wrong was from myself and shaitan. Whatever that was good was from the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I'll take questions. So I guess I can take the more public ones first. Anyone has a question? Oh, sorry, yes. Yes. Barakallahu feek. So what we said earlier for some of the people who weren't here before Maghrib, we said that, and again, there's millions of different theories on parenting, and there's someone out there that will say this is completely wrong. But there's also other people that will say that this is completely fine. I was asked once a question about, is it okay to fight in front of the kids? And I said that it's perfectly fine, if not desirable, that when you fight, that you actually fight in front of the kids. If you and your spouse have established a way to fight in a respectful way, not name calling. And of course, name calling is not okay privately or in front of the kids, right? Because what that tells kids is that vulnerability is okay, and vulnerabilities in marriage is okay. And I gave the example of my friend who never saw her parents fight, and was the first fight in her marriage. She was really distraught because she said, I must have such a bad marriage because my parents never fight. Like, people do that. But to show that the lesson you're teaching the kid is that a lesson of vulnerability and how to deal with vulnerability and how to accept vulnerability. And if you do that with finesse, not with viciousness, right? You mentioned that person. So with patience and finesse and respect, and with assurance to the kid that I love your dad, and he says, I love your mom. We're in a disagreement right now. And yeah, I don't like him very much right now, but overall, I love him. We're going to stay together, whatever. Then the kids are actually end up being much more trustful of the world and much more accepting of vulnerabilities and of days that are not perfect, because they're like, oh yeah, they always do that. They're fine. They'll be fine. They'll figure it out, right? Because you actually had given them a tutoring session in a secure home, in a secure relationship, of how people argue and how they make up and how life goes on after people argue. So I think there's nothing wrong with that. Now, in terms of you being, mashallah, so patient, that's amazing. But I think we also need to draw the distinction between being assertive and being aggressive. I think it's never okay to be defensive and aggressive. I think that's probably bad etiquette. But I think there's nothing wrong with being assertive, right? So I think we need to make the distinction. Sometimes the difference between them is very difficult to define, but I think assertiveness is always a good thing. And let's not forget that people who are always not fighting or are always going along or never disagreeing with whatever that's out there, they're usually disagreeing with their true self. So you never want to lose your true self in this. But you want to be authentic. And people can tell. And people want your authentic self. Like, everybody here, there's a lot to love about you. There's a lot, about being worthy of love because of you, because of nothing else about you, not because of what you have, because Allah has said that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves us for just who we are. Okay, any other questions? So the guys have 2 questions. I just want to point out that the females have no questions. I'm just saying. Yes. So can I give you this? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. And I'm sure you have something very valuable to say. Thank you so much.
So in the beginning, you talked about how depression manifests differently for both genders. Women tend to be, it shows more like a sadness, while men, you said it's more irritation, more irritable. And then you said that it's more, that the irritation is like a mask for the depression. So I was wondering, is there a difference between like a symptom and a mask, or is it more of something that's the general like display as a sign of weakness, or is that something kind of socially constructed to hide it?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Oh man, where do I start there? There's so much I want to say. So first of all, let me put a caveat, a disclaimer first, which is I don't like labeling. I'm not okay with the diagnosis. I'm not okay with the book that currently diagnoses. I'm not okay with these diagnoses. But let's say that the diagnosis has some truth to it, right? Then according to that, you have to fulfill a certain number of criteria, and of course, sadness for at least 2 weeks is one of it. Now, overall, we're saying on average, which symptoms are more obvious. It doesn't mean that the man is not sad, right? But more obvious. Now, depression will differ between a person who's young and a person who's old. So older people will show more of the thinking, cognitive symptoms of the depression than younger people. So the concentration, the paying attention, that kind of stuff. Women will show much more of the sadness, the guilt, the hopelessness, the helplessness than men. Men will show more of the irritability, anger portion much more. Now, it's not a secret that when suicide is in question, or when both genders consider suicide, that men are much more successful in terms of that they actually complete the suicide. Why? Because they're more aggressive and they're gonna try something that's more aggressive. A female might take a cocktail of pills to go to sleep and not feel it, but a man might get a gun and he succeeds. So yes, I am with that. That yes, the obvious symptoms for men is definitely irritability. And there's been a lot of research about CEOs that have left their job of 5-figure salaries, and they take a job in a nonprofit organization that pays nothing like that, because they were found in the lobby of their big 500 Fortune company crying like a baby. So there's a guy I'm thinking of right now, and I can't think of his name. So I'm not sure, early stage of, I don't know what's going on. But man, because I wanted you to look him up. His story is pretty interesting. But basically, he was found in the lobby crying like a baby because he couldn't take this anymore. What many of us would be like a 5-figure salary, a yacht, a boat, like all of the things that are very desirable, but he gave it all up because of that. Does that answer your question? You can follow, like, do you have a follow-up question?
So I mean, it kind of just answers, shows that irritability is not just part of, so there's several symptoms, and that both genders will experience all symptoms to different
To meet the
levels.
diagnosis, you have to actually meet some of the symptoms, and some are more important than others.
And this is based on like the DSM book.
Yes, like a checklist. So according to that checklist, but there's obviously going to be symptoms that are more prominent, or more obvious in one gender than the other. Irritability happens to be for men, and then sadness, guilt, all that happens to be for women. Yeah, and that's obviously on average. So, yes, Adam. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 No, I mean, that is definitely a blessing. And I think Ali radiallahu anhu said that. Can't remember if it's Ali or Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, but he said exactly what you said, subhanAllah, is that worrying about the future creates, again, anxiety, and you don't want to be chained by the past either. So he said something to the effect of what you're saying. And that's why there is afkar, right? Afkar is called afkar because it's dhikr. It's in a state of reminder. And if you analyze the dua, right, for the morning and the night, one of the dua for the morning is that for Allah to protect you from 6 different dimensions. From above, from the right, from the left, from below, from everywhere. You're walking with a security guard, 6 of them in every direction. We just don't say it in the morning or in the masa. So, but Allah has, you say that dua in the morning, and that's basically what you're walking with, right? And I teach my kids that, is that you're saying this, and this is what basically you have a security guard from all 6 different directions. No security guard can protect you from 6 different directions, no matter how muscular that guy is. But with that dua, inshallah, when you're supposed to say it every morning and every masa to protect you from these 6 different dimensions. So yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, mashallah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is my son Adam, everybody. I thought, why not embarrass him? So Adam likes video games. Unfortunately, he's not able to play them at home. We have a really old PlayStation that was given to me by my brother. Otherwise, we'd never buy it in the house. So he's asking this question out of personal gain. I just want to put that out there. So yes, Adam, is that obviously some of the worst, the games, gun games and the car theft, like there's really bad ones out there. And I remember telling a mom, this is a rated R game. She said, it's okay, we have the voice mute. Like swear words are not actually swear words are the benign, the innocent part of this game. The car theft game, there's some are very bad. And it really does get into your inside, and it makes you do things that you're not thinking about, where you don't want to be, right? And especially the superhero ones. But I'll let you play the ones that I'm okay with every now and then. I think he wants to take that commitment in front of everybody. Yes. So I can't hear you. Can somebody pass the mic? I think somebody's.
So you mentioned Dr. Brene Brown's work on vulnerability, but her TED talk on shame I felt was more powerful, and I think it stood out to me more because in our communities there's so much shame.
Yes.
So I guess how would we go about changing that?
Oh my
Changing
God, that's
shame.
such an amazing question that obviously I can't do justice right now. But remember, I mentioned in an earlier talk when we talked about the suicide that a community sent a message saying that they had a family and they lost their kid to suicide. But of course, they're not going to say anything to anybody because we will meet it with stigmatization. Then if that kid has a sibling, nobody's going to marry that sibling. You know, as soon as you say, I don't know, your finger ticks, you're all of a sudden not worthy of marriage. And everybody in the community will know that about you. In one of the messages, somebody wanted to put a self-help group. Self-help groups are amazing because number one, they're for free, right? It's you and the people. You can, I guess, get someone every now and then to structure it, but it's for free. It normalizes your feeling, and you're with a group of people, and you're connecting about a shared vulnerability. These kind of groups, they've actually shown in some studies that with people in stage 4 cancer, so really late advanced cancer, that people who were in a self-focused group like that, they ended up living 1.5 years longer. That's 1.5 years to see your daughter get married, your daughter graduate from kindergarten, your son get that medal in sport. Like, that's 1.5 years of quality life that means something to the people around you. But what stopped that project is that they were worried that if they have a flyer to say self-help or self-focused group for depression, that would be a stigma that nobody would show up. That people would rather be under their blankets in their bed, self-medicating, or suffering from physical disorders we talked about earlier that's related to depression, or living, or really having really bad parenting style, but they don't want people to know. You know, my neighbor, some time ago, one time our kids were playing in front of the house, and very strong, her body was erected really tall, she wasn't weak or anything when she was saying this, with all the confidence and assertiveness in the world. She said, I suffer from depression, I wonder if you have a book on that. She didn't say it in a weak way, she said it in a very assertive way, like, I need to get help. There was nothing wrong with that. Yes, we have a big problem in the community about mental illness. And we don't actually understand what mental illness is. If I were to say right now how many people are diabetic or have high blood pressure, people would raise their hand up. If I say how many people thought about suicide, nobody would raise their hand up. And people might walk actually out of the door. Yeah, we have a problem with that. How we go about it is every person, the masjid is yours, right? If you want to see a change, then you be that change in the masjid. Then you say that we need to have workshops on mental illness. Or I don't think we should start with workshops on mental illness. We should start with knowing what's a mental illness. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we know what ADHD is. I don't think we know some of the learning disabilities. I don't think we know what depression really is. I don't think we know what obsessive compulsive tendencies are. I don't think we know. So I think we need, first of all, to go through a psychoeducational sessions or course where we are introduced to all of these so we can recognize it in our kids or ourselves or our spouses, and then have some sort of component of this of saying, but it's not the end of the world. That people have schizophrenia and they actually become appointed at one of the elite, I think it was Yale, in the psychiatry department. That actually one of my friends who wrote a book and who is a psychology professor is dyslexic, and she was able to do that. I think giving them that okay, that people go on, and that's what they have to work with, and that if you started yesterday, you would be better off, but you certainly don't want to wait till tomorrow to start. So we're not even going to go into workshops yet. I think that's way too advanced for where we are right now. That's a really good question. Yes. That's a really good question. And I have to say that he's my husband. If I don't say it's a good question, that will be a problem later on. So that's an excellent question. No, I really think it's an excellent question. Here's what the third world countries had. I'm not going to say have, is they had connection. They had the self-help groups. It wasn't called self-help groups, but it was called Friday night and we're all invited at so-and-so's house. It was called everybody knows everybody on the street. Like there was this island in Italy, people don't even call. Like we now text. They don't call. When they want to talk to you, they come to your house. People now have to send a message before they text to say, I'm going to text you or I'm going to call you. Is it okay? That's not okay. If we're friends, that's really not okay to have these really walls that nobody can penetrate. So I say had, not have, but because they had connection, they had empathy. Halaqas, right? Regular halaqas, in my humble opinion, that's a type of therapy. That's a type of group therapy. Is to have to sit in a halaqa and what some sort of Islam with some sort of self-help is one of the best kind of group sessions you can have. But as we become in this, yes, we have resources, right? But we have also, I'm self-sufficient, I'm an individual, that I can do this all on my own, and that I'm invulnerable. All of these things actually raise the prevalence of things like depression, suicide. 1 every 5 Americans suffer from a mental disorder. That's staggering. That's a lot. And that's what's out there. There's probably much more of that. But of course, we have a global world now, and globalization means that we have a McDonald's in every country. That's what globalization means. Globalization does not mean that every kid, there's no child left alone anywhere. Globalization does not mean that there's nobody suffers from depression, or that we tackle depression, or that we raise awareness of depression everywhere, in the smallest tribe in Egypt and in Hollywood. That's not what globalization means. So it's a very complicated question. Yes. Can somebody give that nice lady the microphone, please? And then you have a question? Okay, I'll take it right after, inshallah.
I just want to ask you, remember you said that somebody called the sheikh and the sheikh said that you're not religious enough.
So can you bring it close?
Yeah, you said that you're not religious enough, right?
Yes.
And I'm still thinking that, don't you think this is the root cause of all the depression? Because you are not, even though you are going and you're praying and all that, but you are not, you don't have really connected to God, and you don't know why this is happening. Like you are explaining everything, the vulnerability and everything exists. And you have to accept it and understand this is for your own good sometimes, right? So why is not that, like you give the example of Robin Williams, like he has everything, because he was not connected to God. He didn't know why he's here, what is the reason for him to be here. So don't you think that we talk so much about depression these days, and there is. But if we understand our religion and our relationship with God and why we are here in this world, wouldn't it help so many people who are suffering? Because maybe there's something bad happened to me, it's true, and so many things happen, and they go into depression. But if they know the reason why that's happening, like you explained everything, but not everybody has given the chance to know. Like so many people, you go in the like you go into the clinic where they're mentally ill people, and they're getting just prescription medicines and all that. But when you find out about their life, they have no idea. So they don't know why it's happening to them, how to feel, or but if they know the whole picture, like why you are here in this world and why it's happening, wouldn't you think that would help them?
So here's the thing. I like to think of depression, again, I could be wrong, Allahu Alam. I like to think of depression as like an organic one and a broad, like a functional one that you bring onto yourself, depending on what circumstances.
Exactly.
Because somebody can have depression, believe it or not, and there's no cause. Nothing has happened to them in their childhood. Nothing has happened. They've had the perfect parents, everything, and they still get depression. There is a biological predisposition genetically where somebody can be predisposed to depression. It's just like high blood pressure. For example, not with depression, but think about it this way. My kids go to Islamic school, and mashallah, they had Coach K, Brother Khalid, Khaldoon, sorry, and he, mashallah, was so healthy. Of course, he can run mile in a much shorter time than me. and he was so cognizant of what he ate and sunscreen. And subhanAllah, he died all of a sudden from a heart attack because he had a genetic predisposition to a heart attack. His whole family, that was just a gene that was in the family. Same thing with depression. Now, is being spiritual can help the depressed person not get rid of depression, but get them a little bit better where they are currently? Absolutely. Can it completely get rid of depression? I am so skeptical of that because of that genetic predisposition. I know this is so hard for people who have not suffered from depression or who don't have that predisposition, but it can be really, really paralyzing with depression. Depression happens to some of the most religious people. But how they deal with depression, how they ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with help, how they're not saying that, why Allah, why me? Why am I feeling this way? But I've prayed all night. That's the difference between a worshiper and a not. And the person who is suffering from depression and is able to get up and do their 5 prayers and to do their fasting and to do whatever extra they choose to, I imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam that they will be rewarded much more than somebody who can get up with ease, who's full of energy and praise, or praise even late. Because they have to fight this lack of energy and fatigue to get up and say, I need to do this for my Lord, even though it's extremely difficult for me. So again, that's my position. Allahu alam if this is right or wrong, but that's what I know so
You're
far.
right. I mean, I'm not denying it, there's depression, but the thing is, if we, like from the beginning, if you look at somebody's history, if they were given the good religious values and, make them understand everything, they will go through depression, they will go suffer from many things, they lose somebody, and this is not undeniable, but they will deal with it differently. They will not
Absolutely.
Go for
That I agree with
yeah,
wholeheartedly.
they will not go for suicide. So this is what we are lacking, because we are not giving our kids, or let's say,
Yes, that part I do.
public,
I agree with not just for depression, by the way, but people who frequent, whether it's a
Yeah.
mosque or a church. The study looked
Exactly,
obviously
yeah.
not just at mosques, but any kind of religious place that not just their depression or psychological disorders are better off, but also their immune system is better. They're less likely to get a cardiovascular disease, not just depression. So everything else gets better. Absolutely.
even if you come here for like a Jummah session or something, you listen to khutbah and you feel better already.
Yes,
like, so,
yes.
So if there's so many people, they are suffering because they are not connected to God, even though they're religious, but they don't have answers to all the questions, and they are not really connected.
If it's up to me, I would have a geographic grid that covers everywhere, every Muslim, everywhere. And every grid, square of a certain size, would be covered by a halaqah or a leader to function so they can see each other once a week. Even if they're going to say nothing in that halaqah, but give salam to each other. But it's not up to me. So, sorry, someone had a question, so I'm going to get her and then I'll get you, inshallah. So you have to speak really loudly because I can't really give you the microphone. I'm going to try. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yes. No, you. So important. Yes. Well, I wish there were Aqidah vitamins because that's definitely the number one thing that our youth really need. Is they start asking Aqidah questions, and the parent will say, Astaghfirullah, or you know what, you can't think like that, or that's a haram question. But I don't care how old your kid is, they could be a 5-year-old asking you, you gotta give them a question that is convincing. Because they will, if they don't get it from you, they will get it on the internet, they will get it from their teacher, they will get it from whoever. You know, the other, my little one, my 6-year-old, she asked me once, how does Allah see all of us? Like, how could he see everybody? And I said, well, you know, some spiders have 8 eyes. Do you think they see the world the same we see it? And she said, no. I said, imagine the creator of the spider. How will he be able to see the world? We have to, and if you don't know, say, I don't know, and look it up. Go ask somebody in the community that does know, and make them feel this is an important question, and search for it together, and come with an answer. Never, ever. The number one thing that I see youth leaving is because they don't have their aqidah questions answered. Instead of Saturday school, and Allahu A'lam again, I could be 100% wrong, but I think instead of parents being so concerned about how many surahs their kids have memorized, that they have to really, the number one thing that they gotta do first is make sure that they have a sound aqidah. You start with a little bit of holes, and all of a sudden, you see somebody, you know, real cases that I know that have been really stellar Muslims. I'm not even talking about somebody that, stellar Muslims, and they end up really taking off their hijab and then really diverting, going down not a good way. And a lot of the youth leave Islam. Parenting classes, youth classes have to completely change. Parenting class can no longer be about if your teenager says this, you say this back. That you separate the deed from the doer. Okay, we've said that for 30 years, right? That it has to be taking into account parenting classes for, you know, our world of Islamophobia. How are you going to deal with that when your kid comes home? Here is how you should deal with it. Here is the resources that are available. How do you deal with homosexuality? I'm sorry, but that does exist, right? If you're not going to have answers for these taboo questions, you don't want to answer them, there's plenty of people out there that will answer them. You know, a convert once, she went to a non-Muslim therapist, and she was telling her about, you know, whatever she was suffering, and the non-Muslim therapist told her it's because you converted to the Islam, it was an error. What happened is you just had a dopamine rush, right? This chemical that makes you feel good, so you decided to convert to Islam. If we are not behind that sister to catch her, right? Or if she tries to call a sister and says, you know what, well, I am busy with my Arabic crew, you don't know where she's going to go next, right? So we have to be careful about that. Youth groups can no longer be about making crafts. I am sorry to the youth, but we can't afford to do that anymore. We cannot afford that our little kids are going to hold hands and think, I love you, Barney, because that's not what's happening. But the youth, that's it. There's no more craft. That is the world we live in. I don't want it to be like that. I want the youth to be making crafts. But there are some serious issues that if we started yesterday, we wouldn't catch up. And if they're not getting to vent and feel, you know what, I hide that I speak Arabic. I hide that I'm a Muslim. I'm full of shame to say that. And that's a part of their identity. And we're not dealing with that in youth group. Where do we deal with it? To the counselor at the school? Where do you deal with that? So the configuration, the content of youth groups and parenting classes in our community has to take current events, current issues into account. Something happens on TV, whatever, you know, in Germany, in France, pretty much everywhere in the world. That same day, there should be a conversation at the masjid, in the family meeting about, you're going to school tomorrow. Here is how we're going to answer in a unified way. Here is some convincing conversation. We're going to have that conversation today. So you are very confident as a Muslim going tomorrow, and you have your answers ready. You're not going to be like, well, I actually, I don't even pray. Like, I'm not really them. So we do have a lot of work. And in my humble opinion, me first, before anybody, we have failed our youth. We have failed tremendously our youth. But sister, the parent also needs a support group. The parent also needs help when a current event happens of what I'm going to be like if I'm working at the workplace, if I'm going to the grocery shop, if somebody's cutting me up, like how am I going? It's a lot of feelings that we need to purge together as a community and digest it, understand it, and come up with, I feel better now. Because you start to have questions. We have adults leaving Islam too. It's not just the youth. We have people in their 60s and their 70s leaving Islam too. It's not just the youth. So inshallah khair. So let's take one last question, inshallah. Yeah. Oh, you had it first. I'm sorry. I will take your question, inshallah. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, barakallah
And
feek.
I wanted to share something with you, which is you've actually mentioned that this thing about mental illness. I wanted to share the fact that mental illness is actually a disability. I'm an attorney, and I'm going to now give you a definition of disability. Could you please take her outside? Thank you so much. That'd be better for the child. Thank you, sister. The Disability Discrimination Act was put in place in 1990, and this is the definition. It says the term disability means, with respect of an individual, a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities of such individual, such as thinking, walking, manual work, seeing, hearing, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, breathing, reading, concentrating. This is just, the list goes on. So I just want to emphasize that what Dr. Marwa is saying is spot on. Mental illness has physical effects as well. It is an illness, and unless we understand it and treat it as such, we will be suffering as people. So I just wanted to say that mental illness is something that is throughout the world recognized, and people who suffer from it now have a legislation to protect them. That means you cannot discriminate against people who are, let's say, without a leg, or a person who's suffering from depression. So they are treated, they are understood, they're recognized as a problem. And inshallah, may Allah enable us to continue to understand that. Thank you, Dr. Marwa.
Thank you. So we'll take the last question, inshallah.
I wanted to ask more about your, you spoke about vulnerability and the balance between expressing vulnerability
Yeah.
and also satr, like covering your
Yes.
vulnerabilities. So for instance, the families of the children who committed suicide, how would you counsel them about expressing that vulnerability and sharing that with others so others may learn from what happened, and also satr, that's just one example. If you have
Yes.
others that you can give.
Yes. So, and please, Brother Abdulwan, if you could correct me, because from what I understand, when we talk about sitr, we talk about sins. You should not go and be like, oh, well, last night, here's the sin that I did, and talk about it, because then you normalize sins in a society. I am a person of prevention and not intervention, because it's so much easier to do prevention than intervention. Meaning that this kid committed suicide, I'm sure there was a history of so many signs, maybe some of them obvious to the community, where people will silent. So this kid is gone now, right? There's nothing to be done. But it's much easier to do prevention than intervention. The sad part is that when you do prevention, you can't really count that. You can't say, well, we prevented 3 suicides in our community, or we helped people with depression increase their score or decrease their score on the depression test from 16 to 10. That's the sad part. People like numbers. Intervention is kind of attractive because you can say, we started with this, we ended up with a less number, therefore we can have more money. But I imagine, because we're private, right? We don't have to answer to any kind of government grants, that we as a private community, we have connection, we have compassion, we have a responsibility in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we have to intervene. We don't wait to do prevention. So with this particular example, I am sure, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that there could have been so much that would have been done before, maybe not to prevent, but at least to have this be handled by the parents better. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that the parents were the cause of this. I don't know. Maybe the parents weren't the cause of this. Maybe the kid dabbled into drugs and they get hallucination or they heard a voice to kill themselves. I don't know that information. But I know for one of the 7 or 8 cases she was telling me about, some of them were youth that were they were disinvited or not welcomed in the masjid because, a kid had a tattoo. They did not look like they should belong in the masjid. We have to sit together, as a mosque family and decide, is there a candidacy thing where someone can be okay, that they look like a person that should be in the masjid and a person who shouldn't? To me, and Allah knows best, why do we keep wanting the people who are perfect worshippers to only attend the masjid? Shouldn't the masjid be a prevention and instructive to capture these people so you can actually help them? To me, that sounds logical, but not to everybody, and I could be wrong. But I think that everybody should be welcome as long as they're going to follow the general rules of the masjid. But, yeah.
Okay, so basically you said one thing. If there's a sin, then that needs to be...
So let's continue this conversation offline, inshallah. Yeah, I will. Yeah, barakallahu fikum.